So first of all, thank you for joining and for your interest in our webinar. We think this will be a major help not only for industries but even other stakeholders in order to have a better knowledge of OMS service and activities, what we do, how we manage the data, and what is the day-to-day activities. So the OMS, just to start, that the OMS manages one of the 4 domains of SPOR master data in pharmaceutical regulatory procedures. So we have substance, products, organizations, and referentials. The presentation that we'll have today will be on organizations, and just like Isabel mentioned, tomorrow we'll have a presentation dedicated to RMS. Throughout today's webinar, we'll cover some of the OMS key principles. We'll have a look on OMS web portal. For sure, some of the concepts will already be common to all the users, but it's always good to explain because we may have different levels of knowledge within this webinar. Afterwards, we'll provide more information on our OMS process, how we manage the change requests, some guidance on how can you proceed in order to have an change request approved. We'll provide you some information on how we manage the data, how do we manage the customer service that we use using the service desk, and also provide you some information on how do we manage the data quality of our data. So jumping into the OMS introduction part. So the OMS service support implementation of the ISO IDMP standards in the European Union by providing a single source of validated organization data that can be used as a reference to support those regulatory activities as well as other business units. There is a need. Why did we create this? Because there is a need for a better organization and location data, and to initially build our OMS dictionary. EMA used organization data from 5 internal data sources, and we are constantly trying to complete our dictionary, not only by dealing with change requests. This is what we deal on the day-to-day with the external user, but as well by bringing other systems on board. And in terms of data management, so OMS went live in July 2017. So we went live for quite some time now. And since then, we've managed to cover most of the regulatory procedures where we were able to manage and to publish most of the organizations that we had present in our source systems. So we started with managing, of course, NCAs and regulatory authorities. Then we went into the XCV-MPD, where we cover sponsors, market authorization holders for centralized products and for NAPS products. Then we move on into orphan organizations. We integrated with parallel distributors. We managed to cleanse all the manufacturers available from the source system ELDRA GMDB. We integrated with EVVET, and we keep working in order to improve and to complete our dictionary. In the future, of course, this is not a static list. We are constantly trying to search for new sources of information in order to complete our dictionary, to make sure that we have a full list of organizations that take action on European regulatory procedures. So what is OMS? OMS data is hosted by EMA, is accessible to and used throughout EMA and by external stakeholders. OMS provides a central source of organization and location and its respective physical locations that can be used, of course, to support those regulatory activities. An organization is captured according to its jurisdiction. So we need to look at the organization as a legal entity and not looking at the role that a certain organization takes on a regulatory procedure. The organization data is structured having in account not only the name as well as an organization ID and the respective location ID. Additional information that we also have, because we imported data from, in this case, other GMDP, we also retain some of these site reference numbers that we publish in our Sport Portal. The loc ID is crucial to mention that the loc ID is unique, even if we have an organization that even if we have two organizations that they share the same location, let's say a manufacturer, for example, because the relationship between location and organization is different. So for the same physical place, we can have two different locations, but we'll see an example in a few slides where you can have an example of this. So just like I mentioned, in OMS, there is no differentiation between an organization that is created for if it's used as a human medicinal product or in a veterinary medicinal product. OMS does not capture any of the organization roles, since this depends, of course, in which context the data will be used, because we know one organization can act as a market authorization holder in one context, and in another medicinal product, it can take a role as a manufacturer. So for this reason, OMS is a dictionary that does not capture any of those roles. OMS will also not capture individuals unless those are registered in the business registry as a legal entity. Any individuals that may act, for example, as a sponsor, they will need to be dealt directly with other consuming systems. In the same way as individuals, OMS will not capture any departments. Big organizations such as hospital or universities, they will be represented as a single organization. Again, any information on the departments, they will have to be managed directly with the consuming systems. In terms of versions available in OMS, we have this available. The only difference is that you'll not see the standard version 1 and version 2. What you'll see is those versions will be identified as a timestamp version. So you'll have a dedicated day and hour of when was the data last updated. Remember that OMS will always publish the latest information available. So if you try to submit any change request to revert or to create an older version of a record that we have that is today the most up-to-date version of that organization or location, we will not approve. We manage the data with the most up-to-date information. And this is a very common question, which is After all, who can create change requests, who can update the data in OMS? So the answer is simple. Anyone can submit a change request to any of the organization and location published in the OMS dictionary. Just remember, because we had to create a mechanism not only to validate the data, but as well to make sure that the changes are real. For this, you always need to provide supporting documentation. We have a guidance available in OMS Portal that where you can consult, and you'll have access to what is the correct supporting documentation to submit per type of change request. The data. It may seem that OMS only deals with change requests. However, as I mentioned already, in order for us to be constantly expanding our dictionary, we deal with different data management process. One of those cases are the Etl tasks. These are tasks. This is a management process that we use to deal with major source systems that have a lot of data. It's very well structured. It has a cascade of activities where we merge first organizations, then we deal with singleton organizations, and after we finish this first ETL pass of all the information that we imported from a major source system, we have another mechanism because we do this import once a time. And how do we make sure that we have the most up-to-date data is by using the Delta tasks. These Delta tasks is no more than taking a picture of the new source system on a certain day, and we compare with the data that we have available in our system. And if there are any discrepancies, it will create a task and we will proceed accordingly. Other ways to update is by bringing, because we talked about the ETL tasks, these is used because it's a very complex process. We also, when we have smaller systems that would like to bring on board, we use a manual, a more simple process where we have we make sure that we have the data according to that the source system will need to, and we can even make some corrections to our data that may not be the latest version of the data, so we may need to change. And last but not least, the change request tasks that they are submitted by external users, and they have, for these, we have established SLAs. Sorry. Now, for this, we have established SLAs because it's data that the user will need to use in a close future. Now, I think this is a great summary of what is OMS. Just remember, this is very important. OMS is a standardized list of organizations and location data. OMS will not create a copy from the documentation submitted. So the goal, the main objective of OMS is to reflect an equivalent information and standardized information of the organization and location that the user need to use on a regulatory procedure. So our concern is always make sure that OMS reflects the reality, so that we have in OMS the correct organization and, of course, the correct legal entity for a certain organization. Here there may be a few slight adjustments, but is a merely use of data standardized, nothing else. The data should reflect the same as what is captured in the trade registry. Second concern is, of course, that we establish the correct relationship between organization and their own locations. And last but not least, that we have the correct physical location that the industries need to use in their own regulatory procedures. We use, of course, to create the data, we ask the users to submit supporting documentation. We have mechanisms in place to validate and to make sure that the data that we publish is real and it's not it actually exists. And for this, we use reference source of information to ensure that we have data correct and accuracy. OMS, of course, should reflect consistent information, and this is why we use those standardized rules. And the big Bible for OMS is the OMS Data Quality Standards. This document is also published in the Oms Portal. So everything is available to the user. Just bear in mind that what OMS will display will not be a copy, but the aim of the data is to be standardized and to reflect the same data. And how do we apply those OMS data quality standards? So before adding any record to the dictionary, we first need to validate the organization name, the relationship between organization and location, and of course, to make sure that it's a valid physical address. So the data are first validated against the supporting documentation. And we use the business registry to validate that document. And afterwards, we standardize. Once we establish that the organization exists, so then we apply our standardization and we make sure that we follow our OMS data quality rules. For location, data, the validation and standardization, they will be applied more or less in the same line. So the data are first validated against the supporting documentation. Of course, in this case, we may not strict only to the business registry. We may need to consult other sources, just like GMP certificates. And afterwards, we standardize the data as per our OMS data quality standards. And here we have a very helpful tool, which is called Address Doctor. This Address Doctor will cover in more detail on the next slide. This Address Doctor is no more than a help to make sure that the locations that we capture are in a real physical place and they actually exist. Okay. So what is this Address Doctor tool? Why do we have it? How can this help us? So Address Doctor is an address library used for address validation, correction, and standardization. This tool is a worldwide system populated with reference data covering more than 240 countries, and is the only service that combines postal certificates in one single engine from all 5 global postal organizations. So addresses are formatted. This means that we assure that the addresses that we have will be formatted according to the local postal standards. Again, remember, we will not make a copy from the trade registry. We will use the standards that are provided by each national postal service, and we replicate the data. This way we can ensure the correct elements appear in the appropriate fields and that no element will be missing. This reference database is updated throughout the year. So it's not something static that we receive once and that's it. So it's updated throughout several times during the year. This service allows us to enrich address data, not only with missing fields, but as well with geocodes. And this also supports different character sets and even allow us to transliterate addresses such as Greek and Japanese addresses. This means that when a location is recognized by this system, by address doctor, the data will be maintained, the main address will be kept in English, and there will be the system will generate an address in the local language that the user can use, of course, while, for example, during the EAF, they can pick the translation, they can choose between the translation, or they can simply use the English version of the data. So I've been talking about the OMS portal. Most of you already know it. So this is the way to access the OMS dictionary. The portal, I'm talking about this OMS portal, but the portal is a SPOR portal that is currently populated with RMS and OMS information only. The data is public and anyone can access the OMS dictionary. Of course, then we can have other roles. Without login, the user will have a read-only access, and this will be the guest user. To be able to submit change requests, login will be required. To be able to update any data, the user will need to log in. And to log in, there are different roles that the user will be able to choose from. So when the user creates an account within EMA account management, an affiliated role will be automatically assigned. This unaffiliated role will allow the user to export information and to create one change request at a time. This is basically so that the user, if the user to request a SPOR role, they will need to affiliate themselves to an organization. But if the organization is not available in the dictionary, the user will never be able to request this role. This is why we created this unaffiliated role that is in between. The user has access to create a change request, but is not yet affiliated to an organization. Of course, then once the organization is already available in the dictionary, the user will be able to request industry super user or a simple industry users. We have guidance also available in our document section of the OMS portal on more information on what will be the correct role for you, for your position. And in this document, you can access to all the requirements. For example, for the first super user to be requested to be affiliated to a certain organization, we always request a working email from the same organization. This is just a mechanism that we find, for example, when we have CROs or certain activities that are performed by a third party, and if that party no longer works for the organization, it means that the organization lose controls and lost completely this SPOR role. And for this reason, we try to reinforce with our users. First, industry super user need to have a company email. This is just a mechanism for that we created to help us manage the users. Okay, so the so-called document section that I've been mentioning since the beginning of the presentation. Here is where you have all the guidance available. We're trying to constantly updating this section in order to make the guidance with the most up-to-date information. For example, this presentation that you're today seeing in this webinar, it will made it available as well in this document section. I would like to bring your attention to the OMS data quality standards. So this is available there. If you have any questions, where do we find the trade register for each country? How do we standardize an address? All these will be captured in this document. We have also a big document, which is the web user manual. There are a lot of screenshots. So if you have any question that you don't know how to raise a specific change request, you'll have tried to go through all this manual. You'll have all the screenshots that you'll need to help you going through the system. With regards to the search we have in the system, so we have the concept of one organization per country. So once the data is mastered at our backend system, the organization appears in the portal almost instantly. Organizations with at least one active location will be published. The search result can be sorted by columns. You can add different type of keywords, and this can also be filtered. So just for you to see one of the examples that I was referring to. So if we see the green organization, it may seem that we're facing a duplicate, but looking at the details, we see that the org ID, not only the org ID is different, as well as the country. So we're talking about this one organization that they are in different jurisdiction, and for this reason, a new org ID will be assigned. When we look at the log ID and location information, it may seem, and we see that, oh, but we have too many duplicates of the same data in the portal. But if you complete this analysis and look at the location data, you'll be able to see that we will display as many organizations, as many locations the organization will be affiliated with. To open to see the detailed information, you can either click on the link or on the magnifier, and you'll be able to open the organization details, where you can see all sorts of information. You can see if there are any translations. You can see the source systems that I was previously talking about. So you have here the geocoding that it's provided by the so-called address doctor. So I think in a nutshell, this will be the introduction, and we can moving on into the content. So now the key of this webinar, which is the change request process, how we manage the data, how we validate the data. So this is a very well established process that we have. It involves two main parties, so the internal team, which are the EMA data stewards, and the requester. So the requester can submit a different type of changes to the OMS dictionary, add organizations, update organization name, add locations, do all sort of changes as long as they provide the supporting documentation to validate the requested data. This document is very important, and we would like to ask your cooperation on this document, because unfortunately more than 50% of our rejections on the change requests, they are due to the lack of supporting documentation. So we know that the user, we're having too many rejections, and of course we try to provide our best customer support, but without the supporting documentation, we don't have a way to assure that the data is indeed, of course, we have our sources, but we need to have this document to validate the request that we have. Once the user submit the change request, it creates a task in our system. The data steward will analyze the request. At this stage, is important to know that the organization name and location data will be validated against source systems, business registry, or other sources. When we see that that we are facing a valid request, we then move on to apply our rules, our standardization. If we're talking about the organization level, we'll apply the data quality standards. If we're talking about standardization at location level, we'll apply the address doctor tool. After this assessment of the request, we'll take a decision if it's to be approved or reject. The user, bear in mind that if it's an approval, the data will be automatically published in the OMS dictionary and will be basically instantly available in the consuming systems. If it's a rejection, the user will receive an email with the outcome, and as well as a brief explanation of why it was rejected. And if necessary, we also provide some guidance on how can the user submit a change request and have it approved. Of course, all these requests, they have established SLAs. The SLAs will be automatically assigned. There's no human manipulating this data, and this SLA will be assigned depending on the type of change request. If we're talking about a multiple change, it can take, we will be able to resolve it in within 10 working days. If we're talking about a single change, the change can be made available in 5 working days. Of course, we prioritize the change requests based not on the create date, but on the expire date. So we try to prioritize, and I'm pleased to tell you that we've been answer all our change requests within the proposed SLA, so within the 5 working days, and for a multiple change within the 10 working days. So for those that haven't actually submit any changes in the portal, this is the way the form appears in the portal when you try to add a new organization. So to do so, you'll need to complete the form with the minimum information, and of course, always do not forget to attach the supporting documentation. This is crucial for having a successful change request or a change happen. To update any information to the portal, the form is basically the same. The only difference is that there will be some basic information that will be already populated, as well as just like org ID, the name, loc ID. These IDs, as you can see, they are grayed out. You'll not be able to edit because once is published, nothing is deleted from OMS. Nothing. So what we do if we create, if there's a record that shouldn't have been created, what we do is we inactivate the record. Remember that nothing is deleted from the system. If by any chance something is hidden, there's always an explanation for this. Just try to reach us via service desk and we'll try to investigate what happened, but nothing is deleted from there. So what type of changes can you submit in the portal? The user can add or request changes to organization, to location, or to both. The user can submit changes to any of the fields we have available, to the name, to add an acronym, to deactivate the organization, to add a translation. Any of these data, as well as even the address localized. This is the translation of the English version of the location that is automatically generated by the address doctor, that is automatically populated by the information provided by the National Postal Service. As well as here is where you'll be able to find, we had a question on the DUNS. I'm just going to go one slide back so that we can see, as you can see, you have here a dedicated field to populate the DUNS ID. You can create a change request to add this number. Just don't forget to add some sort of supporting documentation. We'll validate. This is one of the cases where, of course, it's not mandatory because we have the ID. What we will do is we'll validate. We'll go into the DUNS website. We're gonna make sure that the DUNS ID that was provided by the user indeed correspond to the organization and to the location that is that the ID is being added. So I think, as I mentioned, so each change request will generate a task in our backhand system. So in the same way that we've been discussing until now, when the user creates this change request, or for example, if a record comes directly from CT, there is a provisional record that is created in our system, and the record will remain provisional, will not be published until we validate the record, until we turn the status of the record from provisional into active, which is when the organization will be generated, and consequently, the data will be made available in the Sport Portal. Just like Isabel already mentioned, so just remember that if the system can only allow one change request at a time, so this means that if, let's say, one user tries to submit a change in a certain location or organization, another user cannot submit a change request to the same data until the first one has been closed. If the user tries to, because there's always a possibility that this can happen, there will be an error message that will be displayed in the portal saying that you can only submit one change request at a time. This way the user will see that there is already a change pending to that record. Now, in terms of what type of location update can you do? This can be a bit tricky. There are not many updates you can do, and the reason for this is in order us to be able to maintain historical data and to track everything in our system. If we're talking about, let's say, an organization that moves from one physical location to another physical location, the correct process here is to create a new location and not to update the data. So the only updates that will be possible to do is to add a floor. For example, if we have a postal code that is not correct, of course, the user will need to submit an update of the location. We'll take the necessary measures to make sure that the information that we have is correct or not. We'll cover this in a few slides. You'll see that we have also a dedicated process to make sure that the information that we publish is correct, as well as if the user tries to submit a change request to make the location as a exact copy of what is in the trade register, this will also be rejected, which is the case. It's very common to receive requests that a user would like to have the street instead of having avenue. They want to have only AV. They want to have an abbreviation of the data. And these will not be acceptable as long as the data is recognized by the National Postal Service, which I can tell you that is in most of the cases, because the data, the system, the address doctor is very complete, and very well populated with data from the National Postal Service. So some of the cases that address doctor will transform those locations. Remember, we are not changing the representation. We are simply rewriting the data. The representation always need to be the same. The same happen. I'm talking now at location, but the same will happen at organization name. We'll see some examples that I think it will be easier to visualize this. But remember, we have standardized rules, and we'll apply those both at organization and location level. Okay. So in terms of, so we covered what can the user do in order to have a change request approved, looking at the internal process. What do we do? What are the steps, the validations that we do? What do we change? So to validate and standardize the data, we already touched base this topic. So we use the supporting documentation, we validate the data against the source system, and then we standardize the name against our rules. Other validation that we do, which is the organization category. Just a small note here, organization category does not mean the role of an organization in a regulatory procedure. Okay, this category, this is also, of course, there is also a guidance made available in our Sport Portal of all the values that we have. But this category is no more than a distinguish between national competent authorities, pharma companies. If it's an ethics committee, it's a categorization of the organization itself, not a categorization on the role of that the organization can take on a regulatory procedure. This category, of course, affects what the user, the type of roles that the user will be displayed, especially between NCAs and industries. Another validation that we do, last but not least, is the location that we have a major help, which is the address doctor, and also apart from using the address doctor, because sometimes the address doctor can make some enrichments, and we need to make sure that the address localized will be in alignment with the English version of the same address. This is part of the validation steps. So now looking into a more practical case, I think now we'll be able to see how do we apply those rules and how do we validate the data. So we receive the change request just by curiosity. This is the way we see the data in our system. So we validate the organization. So we first look at the organization level. This example will cover only the validation and standardization at organization. The next example will have one to analyze the location. So we validate the supporting documentation and its content against the trade registry. Okay, the organization exists. It's a valid certificate, and it was issued recently. So, well, in this case, not very recent because it's an old request. But we also look into the date to make sure that we're not creating an old version of the data. So once we do this first validation, the organization exists and the name is correctly captured. So great, we did the first verification against the data submitted and the supporting documentation. Fine, so we can proceed into the standardization. So looking into our OMS data quality rules, according to the UK legal entity should be captured as limited and not LTD. So what do? We're not going to reject the change request. It doesn't make sense because it's correct. What we do is we approve the change request with a slight change. By only standardizing the data. So what we do, we're not creating a different record, we're standardizing in this case, the legal entity type. So this is, in a nutshell, what happened in the validation and standardization of organization. When we look at the location, because we have the help of the address doctor, is much simpler. What we need to do is we need first, of course, to validate the data against the supporting documentation, just to make sure that this relationship actually exists, and validate the content against the trade registry. After this, we're just missing the standardization, and with the help of address doctor, just with a click, we can do this validation. In this case, this is a very good example of a change that will be performed by address doctor. So in this case, we have there an extra information that it's not vital for the location to be recognized, and in this case we're looking at another organization name, because we can have organizations using other locations. It's fine by us. The only thing is, remember that we will need to standardize, and having another company as part of the address will not be acceptable. For this reason, what we do is we implement the data as it is provided, in this case by Norwegian National Postal Service, and we will approve the request as it is. Of course, we will not reject the change request. We will simply approve it with a slight change, because it's not a big change. It's just by standardizing the data. And also a frequent question, which is, what if the data provided by address doctor is not correct? Imagine it can happen that National Postal Service provided the wrong postal code. We have also another mechanism to validate this data and to make sure that the data that Address Doctor is providing is the most up-to-date and is the correct one. You can also verify this information on the OMS data quality standards. We have the links to some UPU general guidance. This is the guidance on how the address will be written, just a few general guidance. And at the bottom of each document, you will have access to the National Postal Service of each country. And it's in this, by using these websites that we can try to question if the information that Address Doctor is providing is correct or not. Okay, so what if we do all this validation and we see that indeed the user is saying that we have a wrong postal code, and if we see that indeed the Address Doctor is providing the wrong data, we need to correct this data. How do we do it? It's a long process, but we have ways to correct this data. So what we do is, just like I said, we investigate, we confirm that the issue exists, we overwrite the data provided by Address Doctor, and then we contact our internal team so that they can get in touch with the service provider to analyze and saying, listen, this information is not correct. What they do afterwards is they contact directly the National Postal Service because they are the ones providing the data. Okay, once we have the assessment and the National Postal Service recognized that the postal code was wrong, okay, fine. The National Postal Service updates the files. It sends the updated version of the file back to our service provider. We receive the update file, and here is the not so pleasant, is that all this mechanism can take up to 9 months. But what we do, because the user needs to use the data, and we know today that the data is not correct, we will not wait for the 9 months. We will overwrite the data. We will ignore the use of Address Doctor because we just verified that the data was not correct. Once we receive the updated files, that's fine. We go back into the system and we overwrite the data just to make sure that those files are indeed up to date. Because imagine that we have tomorrow an organization that will be created in the same location, then we need to make sure that the data is indeed up to date and is correct. Now we went a bit off track, but I think this is important for you to know that we have this mechanism in place, and we do this investigation every time we receive a request from the user saying that the data that we're publishing is not correct. There's all this mechanism at the back end and investigation that we need to do. So going back a bit to the change request process, if all goes well, perfect, everything is approved, everything is registered, standardized, and published in our portal. If we have a change request that is rejected, there are two mandatory fields that the data steward will need to provide, otherwise they cannot reject the change request. So the user will always be prompted with a rejection reason code, as well as, if applicable, a brief justification why was it rejected, as well as for further guidance on what should the user do in order to have a successful change request approved. Just remember, this is very important. I know that I keep repeating myself, but this is very important because not just like RMS. OMS does not have a change request return option. So after you submit a change request, if you realize that you forgot by any chance that submit the supporting documentation, you will have to wait the change request to be closed to be able to submit a new one. Of course, this is only applicable for updates. If we're talking about a new organization and you notice afterward that you forgot to submit a supporting documentation, just create another one straight away. And don't forget this time the supporting documentation, and everything should go smoothly. Now, why this is so important, because if you are preparing your regulatory procedure while you need to submit changes in OMS, remember that if you're doing an update, you can only submit one change at a time. And if you realize that you forgot the supporting documentation, you'll have to wait for the change request to be rejected to be able to submit a new one. And we're talking afterwards, we're adding days that can delay the wait, that can make you wait more time. In case of a change request that is approved, the data will be made available immediately in the Sport portal. Of course, with the standardization, we've covered this aspect. And just to show you how does it look like a translation. For example, if we're talking about the translation at the organization level, it will be captured as an alternative name. In this case, we're talking about a Belgium organization. And for Belgium, the standard applicable to all the organizations is that we will not keep the legal entity type as part of the organization name. But of course, we understand that the user might need to use it in regulatory procedures. But for this, we will make it available alternative names that the user can always use it in the consuming systems, as well as translations of the respective locations. These will all be available. Last but not least, so we've been talking since the beginning on data quality, on data standardization. Okay, so it may seem that we only do it at the first time upon the registration, but this is not true. We have mechanisms at the back end where we're constantly monitoring the data quality of our data and trying to monitor all the tasks that are done. So it's possible that some changes may have taken place and they may be reverted. So let me assure you that this is not a normal process. It's just for you to know that we have this process in place, and we use it on a day-to-day basis in order to try to maintain the data quality of our data. So in a nutshell, how do we do this? So we have two main ways to do it. We do it proactively and reactively. Reactive, how this means that the user detected an issue, or while we were browsing, we were able to find a data quality incident. So we report this incident in order to work on process improvements in the future, so that we make sure that that incident that took place, it won't happen again. Just like I mentioned, if it's a new one, we mark it as a data quality defect. On a proactive way, we actively monitor the tasks that are currently being performed by the internal team. So we do a sample of all the tasks that the team performs. So we do first a quality control. We do a sample of 20% of the tasks. Afterwards, we do a quality assurance, which is a sample of the quality control that we did, just to make sure that we were able to identify that there are no issues there. And once again, if we spot something that wasn't done correctly, we have a mechanism, we have a process where we contact directly the user and tell him we apologize for what the incident. As part of our data quality management, we identify this issue, and just to let you know, and then we explain what happened and what if in case we reverted any of the changes that were applied. Last, on a final note, we also have a very a more technological way to help us, which is by doing some data profiling. We have at the back end the system that help us monitor the data based on the data quality rules that we have. So if we have an organization that the legal entity is not following our rules, these will pop up in the report as a data quality incident, and we'll try to fix it as soon as possible. This is something that we would like to complete. We're still developing this, but this is a very it's something that it helps us detect the issue as soon as it happened, and because ideally what we would like is not to have any reports identified by the user. And how do we work this? Of course, then those defects can be classified as major or minor, depending on the type of error that we're talking about. If there was a creation of a duplicate, this will be a major. If we merge two organizations that shouldn't be, this is also a major error. We have a defined thresholder, and I can tell you that we are way under this thresholder. So we never actually had such a percentage of errors. So I think considering the whole world of the whole dictionary that we have, I think it's quite good news. Okay, so just now, just to share with you some supporting material and where to find that supporting material. So we have, just as I mentioned throughout the presentation, we have all sort of guidance available in the Sport Portal. It's a very complete document section where we have all sorts of guidance, how to use the web portal, what documentation to submit, information on the SLAs. All that information is available in Sport Portal. We have also some videos on the YouTube channel, some high-level information on the EMA Corporate website, and of course, the EMA Service Desk Portal, where you can directly reach us and where we can provide you a more detailed answer. Would like to leave you as well with some examples that we were able to collect with the help of our SPOR key user group. These are some examples that it helps us understanding what is the impact of a standardization data used in OMS. So here you'll see some examples of how can we write a name when we apply our rules. So our data, the organization name will be captured all in title case, and of course the legal entity type will be captured depending on the OMS data quality standards and the way we define the rules for a certain jurisdiction. This document will be soon published in our OMS portal as well. So you'll have a further information, further guidance, where you can look at more examples and you can have a better understanding on how are those standards being applied in the day-to-day. The same for allocation. Locations, we have much more examples because they can vary in all sorts of different ways. But just once again, remember, OMS will not have publish a copy of the documentation. We will publish a representation of the same data, of course, standardized by the National Postal Service, but the representation will be the same. If there's if another guidance that we're also working, because it may be a bit tricky, but that we also will publish soon in our SPOR portal, which is the how we handle the multiple doors addresses. This can be a bit tricky. We understand that it can lead to some questions. And we understand that, and we would like to provide more guidance to our users, so that you know when to submit a change request, if it's the same representation or not. This should be soon published as well in our SPOR portal. In this case, because it's a very tailored description of the rules, we will only be publishing those rules to top 9 countries, which are the countries that we have with more multiple door addresses. But this, of course, the rule, and they end up being applicable all across all the countries. There are, of course, some specific details per country, but in general, you'll be able to take good knowledge from all this guidance and documentation. Well, and I think we cover the topics that we would like to share with you. Apologies once again for all the technical hiccups. And I appreciate your interest and in our system. It's great to hear that we had so many attendees participating in our webinar. Thank you for your time. Isabel?
Thank you very much for your interest. Apologies for overrunning. We tried to cover as much as possible. If you have any questions, we'll leave the chat for a few minutes. You can still raise them, or you can contact us via the service desk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.